I still remember the steam rising that night, the soft echo of water hitting the tiles, and the awkward silence that sat heavy between us. Helping my best friend shower was never something I imagined I would do, yet there I was, heart racing, hands trembling, pretending it was just an act of care. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. His skin brushed against mine, his laughter broke the tension, and for the first time I saw him in a way I'd been too afraid to admit before. What happened next changed everything between us, and nothing in my life has ever felt the same since. It started on a quiet evening when the world outside felt slower than usual, the kind of night where the air carried a weight of calm, yet inside me, everything felt unsettled. My best friend had hurt himself earlier that day while playing basketball, twisting his ankle badly enough that walking had become a painful chore. He tried to laugh it off, insisting he was fine, but anyone who knew him as well as I did could see through the mask he wore. The sweat on his forehead, the way he winced with every small movement, the stubborn pride in his voice, it was all there. He asked me if I could help him move around for a while until he could get used to crutches, and of course, without hesitation, I said yes. That night, he admitted he needed help with something more personal. His ankle was throbbing, and he hadn't showered since the morning. The idea of standing on one leg inside a wet shower scared him, and though I could see the embarrassment in his eyes, he finally whispered, almost like a secret, "Could you help me out this time?" My heart skipped a beat at his words. Not because it was such an unusual request, but because of the intimacy hidden within it. He was my best friend, the one who had been there through everything, childhood fights, long nights of studying, heartbreaks, and laughter so deep it made our stomachs hurt. And now, he was asking me to step into a moment of vulnerability with him, a moment that felt heavier than it should. I told myself it was just friendship, just loyalty, just care. But even then, I felt a spark deep inside that made me nervous to say yes. Still, I nodded, pretending like it was nothing, like I was doing what any good friend would do. He hobbled toward the bathroom, leaning on me for support, his arm heavy over my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of his body even through the fabric of his shirt, and every step we took seemed to echo louder in my mind than it did in reality. By the time we reached the bathroom, he was breathing harder, frustrated at how weak his ankle made him feel. I tried to lighten the moment with a joke, telling him he looked like an old man struggling with his balance, and he gave me a weak smile. But there was something about that smile, it was softer, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen from him. When I turned on the water and steam began to fill the small room, I could sense his discomfort growing. He stood there, hands fidgeting, trying to figure out how to say what he needed without making it sound strange. Finally, he muttered, "I don't think I can balance on one leg long enough to even wash myself. Can you stay close? Maybe help me with some of it?" My chest tightened, and I forced myself to act calm, nodding casually as though I'd done this 100 times before. Inside, though, I felt the weight of his trust, and I didn't want to break it. He stripped down slowly, with hesitation that only made the silence heavier. I kept my eyes averted at first, focusing on the tiles, the steam, the faint sound of water splashing. But eventually, my eyes betrayed me. I caught glimpses of him, the strong lines of his back, the way the water traced down his skin. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining meaning in something innocent, but the pounding in my chest betrayed the truth I had long buried. As I helped him step into the shower, his hand gripped my arm tightly, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was something unspoken there, a flicker of gratitude, but maybe something more. I reached for the soap, trying to make it look mechanical, like this was just another task, but my hands trembled slightly. He noticed. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, tinged with curiosity. I laughed nervously, brushing it off with, "Yeah, just tired." He didn't push further, but his gaze lingered on me for a second too long. As I washed his shoulders, my touch was gentle, careful, as though he might break if I pressed too hard. Every second felt stretched, Every droplet of water seemed louder than it should be, and in that space of steam and silence, the line between friendship and something else began to blur. I tried to focus only on helping him, but the truth was I was memorizing the moment, the closeness, the trust, the way his body leaned into mine when his balance wavered. I realized then that I had always felt something I never dared to admit, and now it was standing right in front of me, undeniable. That night became the beginning of a story neither of us expected, a story I knew would change us forever, no matter how much we tried to pretend otherwise. The steam was thick in the air, and my thoughts felt just as clouded. He leaned against the tiled wall, his injured ankle keeping him from standing steady, and I stayed close enough so that if he slipped, I could catch him instantly. Every movement I made felt slower, heavier, like time itself had slowed down just to make me notice everything I wanted to ignore. His voice cut through the sound of rushing water when he said softly, "You don't have to do all this, you know. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." The words made my chest tighten, because he had no idea that what I was feeling wasn't discomfort, it was something much more complicated. I forced a laugh, telling him it was fine, that I just wanted to make sure he didn't fall and break his other leg. He smirked, and for a moment, it was almost normal again, almost like the countless times we joked together in the past. But under that smile, I sensed he was studying me, noticing things I didn't want him to notice. When I handed him the soap, his hand brushed against mine, and that tiny spark of touch felt electric. I froze for a split second, then quickly let go, pretending nothing happened. He didn't say a word, but I could see the shift in his expression, like he'd felt it too. He tried to wash himself, moving carefully, but when his balance gave way, I reached forward to steady him, my arm wrapping around his chest instinctively. He leaned into me, breathing hard, frustrated with himself. "I hate this," he muttered. "I hate feeling useless." His voice was sharp, laced with anger at his own body, and I felt a wave of sympathy crash over me. I tightened my grip just slightly, whispering, "You're not useless. You just need help right now, and that's okay." He went quiet, and for a long moment, the only sound was the water hitting the tiles. As I stood there holding him, I couldn't ignore the closeness anymore. My heart was beating faster than it should, and every second I felt the weight of my own secret pressing harder on me. I had spent years hiding the fact that my feelings for him went far beyond friendship, convincing myself it was safer that way. He was the kind of guy who always had girls around, always the center of attention, always so effortlessly confident. I told myself there was no space for me in his world like that, not in the way I wanted. Yet here we were, just the two of us, locked in a moment that felt more intimate than anything I had ever imagined. That he shifted slightly, turning his head just enough to glance at me, and our eyes met through the rising mist. There was something raw in his gaze, something unguarded, and it left me breathless. I wanted to look away, to break the connection before I revealed too much, but I couldn't. He held my stare, as if he was searching for something, maybe even questioning something inside himself. My mind screamed at me to step back, to remind myself that this was just about helping him, but my body didn't move. Instead, I stayed where I was, my arms still across his chest, my heart thundering loud enough that I wondered if he could hear it. He broke the silence first, his voice lower this time, almost hesitant. "You've always been there for me, haven't you? No matter what." I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to say much, afraid my voice would crack under the weight of all the things I wanted to confess. "Yeah," I managed. "Always." His lips curved into a faint smile, but it was different from his usual carefree grin. It carried a kind of seriousness, a kind of awareness that made me feel exposed. He leaned back slightly into me, and I felt his muscles relax, as though he was letting go of something heavy. I realized then that this wasn't just about me helping him wash or stand or balance. This was about trust, about the kind of bond that went deeper than words could capture. He trusted me enough to see him weak, to hold him up when he couldn't stand on his own. And I trusted him enough to stay, even when my heart was breaking with the things I kept hidden. I knew this night would leave a mark, that we had stepped into a space we could never unstep from. As the steam wrapped around us like a curtain, the lines of friendship blurred further, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he sensed it too, even if neither of us dared to name it yet. When the water finally began to cool and his skin was flushed from the heat, I helped him step out of the shower, my arm tight around his waist as he leaned on me. His body was damp, warm, and heavy against mine, and every movement felt like an eternity I didn't want to end. I wrapped a towel around him, trying to focus on the practical act of care, but my hands lingered a little too long, my fingers brushing against his skin more gently than they needed to. He didn't pull away, and that silence made my pulse race even faster. We moved slowly to his room, each step measured, and when I helped him sit down on the edge of his bed, he let out a sigh that was more than just relief. It carried something unspoken, something caught between comfort and uncertainty. I stood there, not sure if I should stay or give him space, but he looked up at me and simply said, "Don't go yet." Those 3 words froze me in place. I nodded quietly, pulling a chair closer to the side of his bed. He sat with his towel wrapped around his waist, his hair damp, his chest rising and falling with the weight of exhaustion. For the first time that night, the silence between us didn't feel heavy. It felt fragile, like we were standing on the edge of something neither of us knew how to define. That he leaned back slightly, his eyes fixed on me in a way that made my stomach twist. "You've always been different," he said, almost to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. My breath caught in my throat, and I tried to ask what he meant, but the words wouldn't come out. He shook his head, giving a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You care in a way no one else does. Like I could fall apart and you'd still be here, holding the pieces." The honesty in his voice cut deep, because it was everything I had always wanted him to see in me but never dared to hope he would. I looked at him, fighting the urge to confess, to tell him that the reason I cared so much was because he wasn't just my best friend, he was the person who had stolen my heart long before I admitted it to myself. But fear kept me still, fear of ruining everything if the truth came out. Instead, I whispered, "You do the same for me." He smiled at that, but the way he stared into my eyes made it feel like he was peeling back every layer I had built to protect myself. He reached out suddenly, placing his hand on mine. His touch was firm, steady, and it sent a jolt through me that I tried to mask by keeping my face calm. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said softly, and the sincerity in his tone made my chest ache. My throat tightened, and I wanted so badly to respond with all the words I had buried for years, but I forced myself to nod and say nothing more. Minutes passed like hours, his hand still resting over mine, and neither of us moved to pull away. There was a shift in the room, something delicate and invisible, like we had crossed into a space that didn't exist before tonight. My thoughts were a storm, questions and fears crashing into each other, but at the center of it all was the undeniable truth: I wanted him. I had always wanted him, and now he was closer than ever, his hand on mine, his eyes searching my face as if waiting for me to admit something. But before I could speak, he broke the silence again. "You're the only person I feel safe with," he said, his voice almost breaking. "Even when I don't say it, you just know what I need." Hearing those words felt like both a gift and a wound. I smiled faintly, trying to hold back the rush of emotion building inside me. I wanted to tell him that I knew what he needed because I'd been paying attention to him in ways no one else had. I wanted to tell him that every laugh, every fight, every late-night talk had built something inside me that could no longer be hidden. But I didn't. Instead, I just squeezed his hand gently, letting the silence carry the weight of all the things I couldn't say aloud. Eventually, his eyelids grew heavy, his body giving in to exhaustion. But even as he drifted closer to sleep, his hand didn't leave mine. He clung to it lightly, as if holding on to me was the only way he could rest. And I stayed there, watching him breathe, memorizing every detail of his face, every line of trust written across his features. I realized then that this moment was dangerous, not because of what was happening, but because of what it meant. The walls I had built to protect our friendship were beginning to crack, and I wasn't sure I could keep them standing much longer. That night, sitting in the quiet of his room, I knew that something had changed forever, even if we hadn't said a word about it. The night passed slowly, though I didn't sleep at all. I stayed by his side, my hand still caught in his, afraid that if I let go the moment would vanish like a dream. I listened to the rhythm of his breathing, steady and calm, and for the first time in a long while, I felt both safe and terrified. Safe because he was right there, close enough to reach. Terrified because the truth inside me was pressing harder than ever, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep it hidden. When the early morning light slipped through the curtains, soft and pale, I finally eased my hand away, careful not to wake him. My body ached from sitting in the chair all night, but my mind was restless. I walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street, and wondered what he would think if he knew. If he saw me not just as his best friend, but as someone who wanted more. He stirred in his sleep, groaning softly as he tried to shift, his ankle reminding him of its pain. I hurried back, helping him sit upright, propping pillows behind his back. His eyes blinked open slowly, still heavy with sleep, and when he saw me there, he smiled faintly. "You didn't leave," he said, his voice rough from the night. I shrugged, pretending it was nothing, though inside I felt the weight of his words. "Didn't want you waking up alone," I replied, keeping my tone casual. He studied me for a moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but instead he leaned back into the pillows, exhaling deeply. The day unfolded quietly. I made him breakfast, brought water to his bedside, and tried to distract him from his frustration at being unable to move freely. He joked about feeling like a burden, and each time he did, I reminded him he wasn't, though part of me wondered if he knew just how much I meant it. It wasn't a burden to take care of him, it was something I wanted, something that gave me a reason to stay close without questions. Still, the closeness carried its own weight. Every time our hands brushed when I handed him something, every time he looked at me with gratitude in his eyes, it chipped away at my self-control. Later that afternoon, when the pain in his ankle had dulled and the room was quiet, he turned to me with a seriousness that startled me. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice low. I nodded, trying not to show how nervous I suddenly felt. He hesitated, his eyes fixed on mine, searching for courage. "Why do you do it?" he asked. "Why do you care this much? Not just now, but always. No one else looks out for me the way you do. Why you?" The question pierced through me like a blade. I opened my mouth, desperate to come up with an answer that wouldn't reveal everything I had been hiding. "Because you're my best friend," I said quickly, forcing the words out with a smile I didn't feel. But he didn't seem convinced. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing with a kind of curiosity that made me want to look away. "It feels like more than that sometimes," he murmured, the air in the room thickened instantly, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. I swallowed hard, searching for a way to respond that wouldn't betray me. "You mean a lot to me," I said finally, my voice softer than I intended. His lips curved into a small, thoughtful smile, but he didn't press further. Instead, he leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment as if absorbing my words. I sat there, my hands clenched together, trembling at how close I had come to saying too much. As evening came, the sky painted itself in shades of orange and gold, filling the room with a warm glow. He asked me to sit on the bed instead of the chair, saying it felt strange having me so far away when I'd been by his side all day. I hesitated, but eventually gave in, settling on the edge of the mattress. He shifted closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and the contact sent a wave of warmth through me. Neither of us spoke for a while. We just sat there in silence, watching the light fade, the world outside slipping into darkness. It felt like we were suspended in a space where nothing else mattered, where the only thing that existed was the quiet beat of our hearts and the closeness of our bodies. Then, without warning, he leaned his head against my shoulder. My entire body froze, every nerve lit with awareness. His hair was still slightly damp, and the weight of his head felt both grounding and overwhelming. I didn't dare move, afraid of breaking the fragile moment. "You're too good to me," he whispered, his voice so soft I almost thought I imagined it. My chest tightened, and before I could stop myself, I whispered back, "You deserve it." He didn't respond, but his head stayed on my shoulder, his body relaxed against mine, and I let myself breathe in the reality of what was happening. As the night deepened, I knew this was no longer just about helping him heal or being a good friend. Something was shifting between us, slowly but surely, and I couldn't tell if it was real or just my own heart playing tricks on me. All I knew was that in that moment, with him leaning against me in the quiet of his room, I felt closer to him than I ever had in my life. And it scared me just as much as it made me feel alive. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, though every second carried a tension that neither of us wanted to name. I stayed close, helping him move around the house, bringing him meals, keeping his spirits up when the frustration of being stuck inside threatened to break him. On the surface, it looked like nothing more than friendship, the kind of loyalty two people share after years of knowing each other. But underneath, there was something else growing, something too strong to ignore. Every laugh, every touch, every quiet moment stretched the line between us thinner and thinner until it felt like one more step would snap it completely. I kept telling myself to stay grounded, to remind myself he trusted me in a way that was fragile, but every time his eyes lingered on me or his hand brushed mine, the control I had fought to keep slipped a little more. One night, after we had spent hours watching movies, he asked me to help him to bed. His ankle was healing, but it was still swollen, still unsteady, and I could see the frustration on his face as he leaned heavily against me. I steadied him, my arm around his waist, and for a moment it felt like carrying something precious, like he was letting me hold more than just his weight. When we reached his room, he sat down on the bed with a sigh, his eyes fixed on the floor. I could sense something different about him, a heaviness in the way he breathed. "You ever think about how much things change?" he asked suddenly, his voice quieter than usual. I frowned, sitting beside him, close enough that our knees brushed. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. He lifted his head, and when his gaze met mine, I saw an honesty there that shook me. "I mean, us. The way we've always been. It feels different now." The word struck deep, sending my heart racing. I didn't know if he meant what I thought, or if I was just hearing what I wanted to hear. My throat felt dry, but I forced myself to respond. "Different how?" I whispered. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine, and for a long moment the silence was louder than anything either of us could say. Finally, he shook his head, giving a small, uncertain smile. "I don't know. Just, different." It left me reeling, my chest tight with the things I wanted to confess but couldn't. I wanted to tell him that yes, everything had changed, that I couldn't look at him the same anymore because my heart was too far gone. But instead, I sat there, nodding like I understood, when in truth I was drowning in the weight of my own feelings. Later that same night, as the room grew quiet and the world outside went dark, he shifted closer to me. We were sitting on his bed, shoulders pressed together, the glow of the bedside lamp casting soft shadows across his face. Without saying a word, he leaned against me the same way he had before, his head resting lightly on my shoulder. This time, I didn't freeze. I let myself breathe him in, the warmth of his body, the trust in the way he let go. My hand hovered, trembling slightly, before I let it rest against his arm. It was a small gesture, barely more than a touch, but it felt monumental. He didn't move away. Instead, he let out a soft sigh, as though he had been waiting for it. The silence that filled the room was unlike any other silence we'd shared before. It wasn't empty, it was full, charged with something that both scared and thrilled me. I could hear his breathing, steady but slower now, and I wondered if he felt the same pounding in his chest that I did. For so long, I had told myself that he could never see me that way, that what I felt would never be returned. But in that moment, with him leaning into me and not pulling away from my touch, I began to question everything I thought I knew. My mind ran wild, every memory of us flashing like a movie, late nights on rooftops, secrets shared in whispers, laughter that left us breathless. Had it always been more? Had I just been too afraid to see it? I stayed there with him until his breathing grew heavier, drifting toward sleep. I didn't move, even as my body ached from the stillness, because the weight of him against me was something I wasn't ready to let go of. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities I had never let myself imagine before. Was this just comfort for him, a moment of weakness he allowed me to fill? Or was it something deeper, something he was too afraid to name just like me? The questions circled endlessly, but one truth burned brighter than all the rest: I didn't want this to end. Not the closeness, not the warmth, not the fragile thread pulling us towards something more. When I finally lay him down to rest and pulled the blanket over him, he stirred just enough to whisper, "Thanks for being here. I don't know what I'd do without you." The words pierced me, gentle and sharp all at once. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to wonder, because I wasn't going anywhere, not now, not ever. But the words stayed trapped inside, caught in the fear that once spoken, they would change everything. Instead, I sat there in the dim light, watching him sleep, knowing that my heart was already too far gone to turn back. Something between us had shifted, and though neither of us had said it aloud, the air we shared told the truth neither of us dared to speak. The next morning carried a different kind of weight, one I couldn't quite put into words. The sunlight poured through the curtains in a soft golden hue, dust particles dancing in the beams, and the stillness of the room felt almost sacred. He was still asleep when I opened my eyes, sprawled across the bed with his injured ankle propped up on a pillow, his chest rising and falling in a calm rhythm. I had spent the night on the chair again, though my body ached from it, because somehow I couldn't bring myself to leave. Watching him breathe, seeing the peace on his face, made me realize how much he had become the center of my world. For years I had hidden behind the word friendship, convincing myself it was enough. But as I sat there in the silence of the morning, I knew that what I felt could no longer be disguised. It wasn't just loyalty. It wasn't just care. It was love, raw and relentless, and it terrified me because I didn't know what it would do to us if it ever came out that he stirred slowly, stretching with a faint groan before his eyes fluttered open. When he saw me still there, his lips curved into a lazy smile, the kind of smile that made the air in my chest vanish. "You stayed again," he murmured, his voice husky from sleep. I shrugged, trying to hide how much that smile affected me. "Someone has to make sure you don't fall out of bed," I teased lightly, though my heart was pounding too hard for the joke to land easily. He chuckled, shaking his head. "I think you just like taking care of me," he said softly, his tone carrying something heavier beneath the playfulness. The words struck me deeply, and I couldn't bring myself to deny them. Instead, I just looked at him, and for a moment the silence between us was louder than anything else. Later in the day, he insisted on trying to move around more, testing the strength of his ankle. I stayed close, ready to catch him, but I could see the frustration building as he stumbled and leaned too much on me. He cursed under his breath, angry at himself, and I grabbed his arms firmly, forcing him to look at me. "Stop," I said firmly. "You don't have to prove anything right now. Healing takes time." His jaw clenched, his pride fighting against his limitations, but then his eyes softened as he stared at me. "You always know what to say," he whispered, almost like it hurt him to admit it. I didn't know how to respond, so I kept holding him, my hands gripping his arms longer than necessary, unwilling to let go until he relaxed. That night, after dinner, we ended up in his room again, the quiet hum of music playing softly from his phone. He was leaning back against the pillows, his ankle stretched out, while I sat at the edge of the bed. The space between us felt charged, thick with everything unspoken. He broke the silence first. "Do you ever think about what people would say if they knew how close we are?" The question caught me off guard, and my chest tightened. I turned to look at him, trying to read his expression, but his face was half hidden in shadow. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully, though I already sensed where his thoughts were leading. He hesitated before answering, his fingers drumming lightly against the blanket. "People talk. They always do. They'd say it's not normal. That guys aren't supposed to." His voice trailed off, unfinished, leaving the words hanging heavy between us that I felt my throat go dry, but I leaned in slightly, my voice low. "Do you care what people think?" He looked at me then, his eyes catching the dim light, and for a moment it felt like the whole world had narrowed down to just that look. He didn't answer right away, but the way his jaw tightened told me he was struggling with it. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know. Maybe I care too much. But with you, it feels different. Like it wouldn't matter." The honesty in his voice nearly broke me. I wanted to reach out, to take his face in my hands and tell him that nothing else mattered but this, but the fear of losing him kept me frozen. The silence that followed was unbearable, both of us lost in thoughts we weren't ready to share. The music filled the space faintly, and then, slowly, he reached out his hand, brushing it against mine. The touch was hesitant at first, almost cautious, but when I didn't pull away, he let his fingers rest there. My breath hitched, and I turned my hand over, letting our palms press together. His skin was warm against mine, his grip uncertain but real, and in that moment the world outside ceased to exist. We sat there like that, hands clasped, saying nothing, but the silence spoke louder than words ever could. Time seemed to blur as we stayed like that, and I realized he was trembling slightly. I squeezed his hand gently, offering reassurance without words. His eyes met mine again, and for the first time, there was no hiding in them. No walls, no jokes, no distractions. Just raw truth staring back at me. "You scare me sometimes," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. My chest tightened. "Why?" I asked softly, afraid of the answer. He swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving mine. "Because you make me feel things I don't understand. Things I've never felt with anyone else." Those words shattered something inside me, pulling down walls I had been guarding for years. I wanted to tell him that I felt the same, that I had been carrying this love for so long it had become part of me. But the fear still lingered, heavy and suffocating. So instead, I held his gaze, my silence speaking what my lips couldn't. He seemed to understand anyway, his hand tightening around mine, his eyes softening as if he had heard the confession without me saying a word. That night, as the music faded and the room grew darker, we didn't let go of each other's hands. And though neither of us spoke of it aloud, I knew something had shifted again, deeper this time, carving itself into a place we could never return from. The days began to blend together, but each one carried more weight than the last. His ankle was healing slowly, and though he could put more pressure on it now, he still leaned on me more than he wanted to admit. I never minded. Every moment I spent close to him felt like a gift I wasn't supposed to have, and I clung to it even as the fear of losing it gnawed at me. What had once been simple friendship now existed in a space that felt dangerous, a fragile balance between what we showed and what we hid. I told myself I was strong enough to keep it quiet, to stay in control, but every look, every touch, every unspoken moment chipped away at my resolve. It was as though we were both standing on a cliff edge, neither of us brave enough to jump, but neither willing to step back either point. One evening, we found ourselves sitting outside on the porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain, and the world seemed quieter than usual. He sat beside me, his injured foot propped up on a small stool, and for a long time we said nothing. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was the kind of silence that made my chest tighten, the kind that filled itself with meaning without words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and careful. "Do you ever think about what would happen if people knew how much we depend on each other?" The question caught me off guard, though it wasn't the first time he had brushed against the edges of something deeper. I glanced at him, watching the way his fingers fidgeted with the sleeve of his hoodie, and I felt the weight of his questions sink into me. "I don't really care what they'd say," I answered after a pause, my voice steady though my heart was racing. "All I care about is you." He turned to look at me then, his eyes holding mine in the dim light, and the intensity of his gaze made my throat tighten. For a moment, I thought he might say something, confess something, but instead he just shook his head slightly, as if fighting with himself. "You make it sound so simple," he whispered, almost like he envied me for it. I wanted to tell him it wasn't simple at all, that it was the hardest thing I'd ever carried, this love I had for him. But I stayed quiet, letting the moment linger, letting him feel whatever it was that kept him from speaking the words out loud. When we went back inside, the closeness between us didn't fade. If anything, it grew heavier. He asked me to sit with him while he tried to fall asleep, and I agreed, though I knew it would only make my heart ache more. He shifted in the bed, restless, before finally looking at me with tired eyes. "Can I be honest with you about something?" he asked, his voice barely more than a murmur. My stomach tightened, but I nodded, bracing myself. He hesitated, his fingers gripping the blanket tightly, and then he said, "Sometimes I think about how different life would be if we weren't just friends." The words hit me like a tidal wave, stealing the breath from my lungs. I sat there frozen, staring at him, my mind scrambling for an answer that wouldn't betray me completely. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it calm. He let out a shaky laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I don't even know," he admitted. "It's just, when you're around, I feel things I don't feel with anyone else. It scares me, but it also feels like the only thing that makes sense." His confession cracked something open in me, something I had been holding back for years. I wanted to tell him everything, that I had loved him quietly all this time, that every smile and every touch had meant more to me than he could imagine. But fear rooted me to the spot, fear that if I spoke the truth, it would destroy the fragile thread binding us together. So instead, I reached out and placed my hand over his. He didn't pull away. In fact, he turned his palm up, lacing his fingers through mine. The warmth of his hand seeped into me, grounding me even as my heart raced wildly. He looked at me then, his expression soft but full of questions, as if he was waiting for me to say something that could make sense of everything. I squeezed his hand gently, hoping he could feel the words I couldn't bring myself to speak. His eyes lingered on mine a moment longer before he sighed and leaned back into the pillows, his grip on my hand tightening slightly as if he was afraid I'd disappear. The room grew darker, the only sound the faint hum of the night outside. My mind was a storm of emotions, a swirl of love, fear, and longing, but beneath it all was a quiet certainty. Something had shifted between us in a way we could never undo. We weren't just best friends anymore, not with the way his fingers intertwined with mine, not with the way he had confessed the thoughts that kept him awake at night. Even if neither of us said it outright, the truth was already there, hanging in the air between us, undeniable and irreversible. As he drifted toward sleep, his hands still locked in mine, I realized that no matter what came next, nothing about us would ever be the same again. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if that terrified me or made me feel alive. The night stretched long, and though his breathing grew heavy beside me, sleep refused to come to me. My mind was restless, tangled in every word he had spoken, every touch that lingered, every silence that carried more meaning than we dared to admit. I sat there in the dim glow of his room, my hands still intertwined with his, and I realized that the line between us had already vanished. We had crossed it, silently and carefully, but the truth was there in the way he held on even in his sleep, the way his fingers gripped mine like he was afraid I'd let go. For years, I had dreamed of something like this, always pushing it down, telling myself it wasn't possible. Yet here we were, caught in a space where friendship had transformed into something deeper, something we couldn't ignore anymore. When the morning came, I expected him to pull away, to act as though the night before had never happened. But when his eyes opened and landed on mine, there was no denial there. Instead, he smiled softly, almost shyly, and whispered, "You're still here." His voice carried a tenderness I had never heard before, and I felt my chest tighten. "I told you I'm not going anywhere," I replied, and for once, I let the weight of those words linger in the air. He didn't answer immediately, but his gaze lingered on me, searching for something, maybe for confirmation of the truth he already suspected. As the day unfolded, there was a quiet shift in the way we moved around each other. He didn't shy away from touching me anymore, his hand brushed mine when I helped him walk, his shoulder pressed against mine when we sat together, his laughter softer, directed more at me than at the world. It was as though something unspoken had settled between us, an understanding that we had both been too afraid to name until now. Still, neither of us said the words out loud, and that silence carried its own weight. We were caught between fear and desire, between the comfort of what we had always known and the pull of what we both felt growing stronger each day. That evening, as the sky outside burned with the colors of sunset, he asked me to sit with him again. We were on his bed, the room bathed in soft orange light, and he leaned back against the pillows with a tired sigh. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his tone more serious than usual. My heart stuttered at the words, bracing itself for what might come next. "About us," he continued, his eyes fixed on mine. "About the way I feel when you're around. It doesn't make sense, but it's real. I can't keep pretending it's not." The confession landed like a storm inside me, tearing down the walls I had built, leaving me bare and exposed. My throat felt tight, my hands trembling as I searched for the courage to answer. For so long I had buried my feelings, afraid of ruining everything, but now he had pulled them into the light, and I couldn't hide anymore. "I felt the same for a long time," I admitted finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with years of longing and denial breaking apart. His eyes widened slightly, then softened, and before I could lose my nerve, he reached out and cupped the back of my neck, pulling me closer. The kiss was hesitant at first, almost unsure, but it carried every unspoken word, every hidden feeling, every moment we had locked away in silence. My chest ached with relief, with fear, with joy, with everything all at once, and when we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathless. "We can't pretend anymore," he whispered, and I nodded, because I knew he was right. Whatever this was, whatever we were, it was no longer something that could be pushed into the shadows. We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the fading light, both scared of what came next but unwilling to let go. The world outside might never understand, might judge us or tear us down, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way his hand fit in mine, the way his voice softened when he said my name, the way his kiss had made everything I had ever feared worth it. That night, as darkness settled in and the silence wrapped around us, I realized that our story had only just begun. It wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't going to be easy. But it was ours, raw and real and unshakable. For the first time, I let myself believe that love like this, unexpected, unspoken, and unstoppable, was something worth holding on to, no matter what the world had to say. And with him beside me, I knew I wasn't afraid anymore.